I woke up to the sound of violins and laughter, two things I definitely hadn't ordered for breakfast. At first I thought I was dreaming, maybe something from an old movie playing on the TV I forgot to turn off. But no. The music was real, the laughter too clear, and the scent of fresh-cut flowers wafting in through the window, that was the kicker. I shuffled over, yanked open the blinds, and nearly dropped my coffee. My backyard, the same one I'd mowed, mulched, and maintained for years, had been hijacked. Hijacked by what looked like a wedding catalog that exploded across my lawn. White chairs lined the grass in symmetrical rows, a full floral arch stood by my koi pond, and some guy in a chef's coat was arranging shrimp skewers like this was the freaking Ritz. A string quartet sat near the fence, casually sawing away at Vivaldi like this was a charity gala. And right in the middle of it all, waving a clipboard like she'd just signed the Declaration of Independence, was Karen. Yes, that Karen. The queen of the HOA, the clipboard tyrant, the passive-aggressive monarch of the neighborhood. She was strutting around in heels like she owned the land. And by the look on her smug face, she believed she did. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. I threw on jeans, stomped into my boots, and marched outside, gravel crunching under my heels like thunder. My heart was racing. Maybe this was some massive mistake. Wrong address? Last-minute location switch? Surely someone had booked the wrong venue. Then I saw the banner. Welcome to the wedding of Sophia and James. And just like that, any hope of this being a mix-up evaporated. Karen turned just in time to see me approaching, her face lit up with a fake smile, sugary sweet and dipped in arrogance. "Oh, good morning, Jake," she chirped, like I was her hired help. "Isn't it just gorgeous? The community is going to love this." I stopped dead in my tracks. "Karen," I said flatly, "what the hell is this?" She laughed, a light airy giggle, like she was auditioning for a baking show. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, flipping her clipboard like she was revealing blueprints. "It's just a small wedding. We needed the perfect outdoor venue, and honestly, your yard was the best option. You should feel honored. The bride's family is very prestigious." I stared at her. Words failed me. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is my land. You cannot just set up a wedding here without my permission." Karen rolled her eyes like I'd asked her to cancel brunch. "It's for the good of the community, Jake. And besides, we tried calling you, but you didn't answer your phone." "That's because you never called me," I snapped. She sighed like I was being unreasonable, like I was the one throwing a wedding on someone else's grass. "The HOA guidelines allow for community events in appropriate locations," she said smugly. I folded my arms. "Karen, for the 100th time, I'm not part of the HOA." She waved a hand. "Technicalities. You live here, don't you? That means you should contribute to the community. It's just one day. Stop making a fuss." Before I could respond, the bride and groom approached. The bride, a blonde woman with perfect curls and an overdone spray tan, smiled at me like we were long-lost friends. "Oh, you must be Jake," she beamed. "Thank you so much for letting us use your land. It's breathtaking." I gritted my teeth. "I didn't let you use anything," I said. "Karen set this up without asking me." The groom, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, chuckled. "Come on, man, no harm, no foul, right? It's just one day. Besides, we already paid for everything. The guests are on their way." My stomach twisted. "Paid?" I asked. "Paid who?" Karen piped up again, as smug as ever. "To the HOA, of course. A very reasonable fee, if I do say so myself." I just stared at her. Not only had she stolen my land for this ridiculous event, she'd made money off it. She flipped a page on her clipboard. "Oh, and by the way, the catering trucks had trouble parking, so we had them use your driveway. Hope that's not a problem." I turned, and there it was, my driveway completely blocked. Trucks, vans, a limousine. Not only could I not get out, I couldn't even get to my garage. That was it. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "Move it, all of it, now." Karen scoffed. "Jake, don't be unreasonable. The ceremony starts in an hour. Just go inside and relax. It'll all be over soon." Relax. On my land, surrounded by strangers, while she made money off my space. Karen turned back to her guests like the matter was settled. The bride and groom wandered off toward the floral arch, blissfully unaware that their big day was built on theft and trespassing. I pulled out my phone. "Hey," I said when my farmhand picked up. "Open the back gate." There was a pause on the line. "All of them?" I glanced at Karen, now laughing, with a couple of HOA board members like she was Martha Stewart in heels. "Every single one?" My farmhand laughed. "Got it, boss." I slipped the phone into my pocket and wandered over to the buffet, casually grabbing one of those overpriced shrimp skewers. They wanted a wedding on my land? They were about to get a real farm experience. It started with a phone call. Just 3 words. "Open the gate." And like the universe had been waiting for that exact command, it responded with hooves. My farmhand didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need to. When I gave that order, he knew exactly what I meant. They wanted rustic charm, I gave them rustic chaos. First came Diesel, my bull, thundering through the back gate like a 4-legged wrecking ball with a personal vendetta. His eyes locked onto the towering wedding cake with all the subtlety of a heat-seeking missile. A guest gasped. A bridesmaid screamed. Diesel didn't flinch. He galloped forward and body-slammed that cake like it owed him money. 3 layers of white fondant, dreams exploded in all directions, frosting flying like snow in a blender. Guests screamed. Chairs toppled. A man in a navy suit tried to catch a platter mid-air and ended up wearing it like a hat. The band stopped playing mid-sonata. And in the middle of it all, Diesel stood, nostrils flaring, licking buttercream off his nose like a villain who just made his move. Then came the herd, cows of every size and attitude stomping across the wedding like they were there for a barbecue, not a ceremony. They weren't hostile, they were curious and big and very, very disruptive. A few stopped to graze on the floral arrangements. One got tangled in white satin ribbon and paraded around like she'd won Miss Dairy Queen. Karen spun around, eyes wide with disbelief, mouth frozen in mid-fake smile. What is happening? But the party was just getting started. Cue the goats. Goats are nature's chaos consultants. Where cows destroy passively, goats seek out the most delicate, the most expensive, the most irreplaceable, and then chew on it like bubblegum. One pranced straight onto the gift table, sniffed a box labeled "To the Happy Couple," and then knocked the entire stack to the ground like a furry bowling ball. Another made a beeline for the DJ booth, hopping up with the grace of an Olympic gymnast and stomping on the control board with all 4 hooves. The classical music warped into something between dubstep and an exorcism. Wires tangled, the speakers blared a distorted violin shriek before cutting to static. The goat just stood there, wagging its tail, proud like it had just remixed Beethoven. Who needs a DJ when you've got hooves? Guests were now in full-blown panic mode. Bridesmaids in pastel dresses scattered like birds in a windstorm. A man clutching a plate of shrimp cocktail was using it like a shield. And through it all, Karen stood frozen, as if disbelief alone could reverse the chaos. Her clipboard, her mighty scepter of control, was now shaking in her hands. And then, the honk. Sergeant Honkers had arrived. He's not your average goose, and he's big, mean, and carries a grudge like it's a family heirloom. Honkers took one look at the crowd, puffed out his chest, and let out a honk so aggressive it echoed off the trees. People turned, unsure whether to laugh or flee. The groom didn't have a choice. Sergeant Honkers launched his attack. Wings flapping like war drums, beak aimed like a missile, he charged straight at the man in the fancy suit who had dared to say no harm, no foul earlier that morning. The groom screamed, tried to backpedal, but Honkers was faster. A nip to the ankle, another to the shin, a blur of feathers and panic. The groom tripped over a folding chair and fell flat on his back as Honkers stood victorious on his chest, honking like a battle cry. Symbolism? Oh, you bet. That goose wasn't just a bird, he was nature defending its own. Karen shrieked again, her voice rising above the chaos. "Call the police! Someone call the police! This is sabotage!" I sipped my drink and raised my hand like a helpful student. "Please do. Let's make it official." The bride sobbed from behind a half-trampled archway, her mascara painting gothic tears down her cheeks. The flower girl was hiding under a buffet table, clutching a cookie like it was a flotation device. A cow wandered through the aisle dragging a white ribbon like a sad parade float. Karen turned to me, red-faced and panting. "You'll pay for this!" "Already did," I replied, in hay-feed and boundary lines, "which you ignored." She looked like she wanted to breathe fire. I just grinned. The guests, who hadn't already fled, were either filming or frozen in disbelief, and behind it all, Sergeant Honkers let out another honk, loud and clear, as if signaling to the heavens that karma had arrived, and it had feathers. He was a little sadder to be spending the holidays alone. He could hear it from the next county, the honking, the shrieking, the sound of silk heels sinking into cow manure. The elegant outdoor wedding had turned into a stampede of shattered expectations. Guests were fleeing in every direction, heels snapping, drinks spilling, a toddler clutching a teddy bear, sprinting like he was escaping a Jurassic Park sequel. The bride stood in the center of the chaos, dress torn at the hem, bouquet crushed in her trembling hands. She looked like a porcelain doll melting in the sun. Her carefully pinned hair had collapsed into a nest of panic, her tears streaking mascara down her cheeks like racing stripes of regret. The veil, once a symbol of joy and new beginnings, now hung limp, wet with champagne and frosting. It wasn't a veil anymore. It was a tissue of lies. Her mother tried to console her, but the bride wasn't listening. She was locked in a silent standoff with the universe, and the universe was cackling in return. Then came the shouting. The bride's father stormed toward Karen like a man who had just realized he'd funded a circus without buying a ticket. "You told us this was taken care of," he bellowed, face red, voice shaking. "You said the owner agreed. You said this was a legitimate venue." Karen, suddenly looking much smaller without her clipboard armor, tried to conjure her trademark condescension. "Well, I mean, it was supposed to be. Jake wasn't using his yard for anything important, and the bride's family is very prestigious." "That is not an answer," the mother snapped, dabbing her daughter's cheeks with a monogram napkin. "You lied to us. You lied to everyone." Even the groom, now picking hay out of his lapel and limping from Honker's bruising welcome, chimed in. "We paid the HOA thousands of dollars. This is theft. This is fraud." Karen's jaw worked like she was chewing invisible gum, but no words came out. "You scammed us," the father said coldly. "And we're getting our money back. Every single damn penny." Karen's grip tightened on her clipboard like it might still rescue her. "Now, let's not be dramatic," she said, her voice brittle. "It's just a little hiccup, a minor." "You call this minor?" the groom roared, pointing toward the buffet table where a goat was happily chewing through someone's designer purse. "My groomsman stepped in cow dung. My wife is crying. A goose bit me. You're done." Karen was spiraling. You could see it on her face. The unraveling threads of ego, stitched together by lies and stitched apart by goats. She turned to me with the rage of a woman who had just realized she was no longer in charge. "Hell passes the bridles. This is your fault," she shrieked. "You let your animals loose on purpose. You sabotaged this wedding." I raised an eyebrow. "Huh? Karen, who gave you permission to throw a wedding on my land in the first place?" Silence. That glorious, heavy silence. And then the real twist of the knife. From the group of horrified HOA board members emerged a voice. A woman with oversized glasses and the composure of a librarian at a bar fight stepped forward. "You told us Jake approved the event," she said, glaring. "That's the only reason we gave you the green light." I laughed. Not loudly, just enough to let it cut. "Approved?" I said, turning to the crowd. "I'm not even in the HOA. I've told you people that 5 times. You don't get to approve anything on land you don't own." The mood shifted like a cold wind. Karen's power base, The HOA cronies, who once nodded along to every absurd policy about mailbox height and lawn gnome colors, were now shuffling backward like roaches under a floodlight. You could see them calculating the fallout, distancing themselves 1 foot at a time. Karen stammered. It was a community event. You charge strangers for a fantasy, I said, voice calm and cool, now face reality. Just then, the sound of sirens cut through the noise like a needle on vinyl. Everyone froze. Karen's face lit up with relief. Finally, someone to save her. She bolted toward the approaching patrol car like it was a life raft, pointing at me as the officers stepped out. "Officers, that's him!" she shouted. "He released the animals. He destroyed this wedding. Arrest him!" One of the officers, a tall man with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen it all and then some, looked around. He scanned the field of toppled chairs, ruined cake, grazing livestock, and the goose that was still patrolling like an angry mall cop. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Whose property is this?" I raised my hand. "Nope." The officers turned to Karen. "So you held a paid event on land you don't own?" Karen's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. The bride's father stepped forward, waving a receipt. "We paid her. We have proof." The officers exchanged a glance. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us and answer a few questions at the station." Karen gasped. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong." "You'll have your chance to explain," the officer said, pulling out a notepad. Karen's voice grew shrill. "This is harassment. This is political," I smirked. "Tell it to the judge." As she was escorted away, screeching about bylaws and slander and her brother the paralegal, the wedding guests began to scatter. The groom was helping the bride to her feet, her mascara-streaked cheeks turned to me. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm sorry." "Next time," I replied, "double-check who owns the venue." She nodded. Her parents guided her away, past the goats, the cows, and Sergeant Honkers, who honked one final time as if to say, "Case closed." Karen was gone, but her legacy lingered like perfume in a crime scene. And as I walked back to the house, the weight of it all behind me, I thought, justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it honks. By the time the sun dipped behind the tree line that evening, the wedding was over, not because the ceremony had concluded, but because every guest had either fled, been chased off by livestock, or was too emotionally fried to stay. The once pristine chairs were overturned like battlefield debris. The floral arch lay snapped in half beside a trampled punch bowl, and one of the goats had curled up on a pile of wedding favors like it had won a prize. I was back on my porch, sipping sweet tea, watching Sergeant Honkers waddle in victory laps across the lawn, occasionally flapping his wings at a drifting napkin like he was asserting dominance over leftover trash. It was peaceful. Until Karen returned. Not to apologize. No, that would have been too human. She showed up the next morning with city inspectors in tow. I heard the truck before I saw it, white with the seal of the city stenciled on the side. 2 men stepped out in tucked shirts and clipboards, followed closely by Karen, waving a folder like it was the Magna Carta. The moment I saw her smug face, I sighed. One inspector greeted me with the forced smile of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Jake, we've received multiple complaints about property violations and unregistered event activity. We're here to conduct a zoning compliance inspection." I didn't even blink. "Complaints? From who?" The second inspector cleared his throat and tilted his head toward Karen, who stepped up with her best, "I'm just a concerned citizen," face. Several HOA members raised concerns after the, incident. "There's been talk that your farm isn't properly regulated. Your animals are disturbing the peace." I folded my arms. "So let me get this straight. You hijacked my land for a wedding, got publicly humiliated, and now you're trying to get me cited for owning animals on a farm I've had for 15 years? Karen offered a dramatic sigh, clutching her folder like she was holding a baby bird. "It's not personal, Jake. It's about the community. We just want to make sure the standards are being upheld." The first inspector shifted awkwardly. "We'll just take a look around. It shouldn't take long." I stepped aside. "Knock yourselves out." Karen followed them around like a tour guide from hell. She pointed at the barn, at my water tanks, at a pile of fertilizer like she'd just uncovered a scandal. The inspectors jotted notes, nodded occasionally, but the longer the inspection dragged on, the more Karen's face began to tighten. By the time they returned, she looked like a balloon someone had slowly let the air out of. "Well?" I asked, trying not to smirk. One of the inspectors closed his clipboard. "Everything is up to code. Animals are contained, zoning is correct, no violations." Karen's mouth opened, but the inspector cut her off. "And as for the complaint about the goose, farm animals on farm property do not constitute a public nuisance," I chuckled. "Especially not Honkers. He's part of the welcome committee." The inspectors nodded, thanked me for my time, and got in their truck. Karen didn't follow. She stood there, fists clenched, eyes burning. "You think you've won." I leaned against the porch rail, relaxed. "Karen, the only reason you're not facing charges right now is because I didn't press them." She took a step closer. "You humiliated me. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea how much that wedding cost?" I shrugged. "Do you have any idea how much a trespassing conviction costs?" She flinched. For the first time since this disaster began, she looked uncertain, vulnerable even. But only for a second. Her mask snapped back into place, brittle and bitter. "I'm not finished," she hissed. "This isn't over." "That's your problem," I replied. "You think HOA stands for her overlord authority. But out here, it still means hands off. Aggressor. Go home, Karen." She stormed back to her car and peeled away in a puff of dust, tires squealing like a toddler's tantrum on wheels. I didn't even bother watching her go. I had more interesting things to do, like refilling Sergeant Honker's kiddie pool and enjoying what I thought might be the first quiet evening in weeks. But peace never lasts when Karen's got internet access and a printer. Later that afternoon, one of the HOA members messaged me. "Emergency meeting tonight. Karen's losing control. You'll want to see this." I couldn't resist. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and stale muffins, the usual setting for these neighborhood slapfests. But tonight there was a different energy, tense, electric. Board members were whispering in corners. No one greeted Karen as she entered. Even her closest allies sat 2 chairs away. I slipped into the back, arms folded, watching her cling to her clipboard like it still meant something. The president of the board, a tired man named Walt, stood and cleared his throat. "We're here tonight to discuss a serious breach of trust, namely the unauthorized use of private property for a paid event and the misrepresentation of HOA authority." Karen bolted upright. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. It was a community oversight." Someone from the side snapped. "You forged consent," another added. "You stole funds." The bride's father had already begun contacting lawyers, I heard. Receipts were circulating. HOA members were panicking. They were realizing, finally, that Karen was not a strong leader. She was a legal liability with a thirst for control. Walt looked around the room. "There's been a motion to vote on removing Karen as acting president of the HOA." Karen shot up like someone lit her seat on fire. "You can't do that! I built this community. You owe me." Walt replied calmly, "No, Karen. We owe this community honesty." One by one, hands went up. No hesitation, no second guessing, no second guess. Karen's face drained of color. It was unanimous. She stood frozen for a beat, then gathered her things with the dignity of a dethroned monarch, slamming her clipboard down on the table as she stormed out of the room. The door slammed. The silence afterward was profound. I stood up. "Well," I said, "anyone want to borrow a goat? They've got great political instincts." Laughter rippled across the room. It was the first time I'd seen the community look relieved. Walt nodded at me. "Thanks, Jake, for everything." I gave a half smile. "Next time, maybe listen the first time someone says they're not part of your HOA." As I left the building, I passed the clipboard Karen had left behind, tried to pick it up, flipped it open. Empty pages. Just like her authority now. 2 days after the now infamous wedding disaster, I was settling back into something that resembled peace. The animals were content. My land was quiet again. The only sounds were the rustle of trees and the occasional distant laugh as neighbors swapped stories about Karen's goose fiasco. For once, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd taken the hint. But Karen was like a weed in the cracks of a pristine sidewalk, hard to get rid of and always growing back uglier. That morning, my phone buzzed, just as I was about to let Max out to roam the property. It was a message from my farmhand who lived on the other side of the property line. "Boss, you got company. Front yard. Looks official." I walked outside and saw the city vehicle parked neatly at the gate. 2 men, clean-shaven and clipboard-equipped, stood beside it, their posture just stiff enough to signal government work. And there, arms crossed, and face brimming with righteous confidence, stood Karen. Her blouse was stiffly ironed, and she clutched a fat folder like it was the Constitution. One of the men approached and offered a polite, practiced nod. "Is Mr. Jacob? We've received several complaints from the local homeowners association about possible zoning violations and livestock nuisances on your property. We'd like to conduct a brief inspection." I didn't even need to look at Karen. The smug curve of her mouth told me everything I needed to know. She was playing her last card, trying to use bureaucracy to take back control. "Of course," I said evenly. "Feel free to look around." The men gave polite thanks and started their walk. Karen hovered behind them like a chaperone on a field trip, pointing at fencing, water troughs, a compost bin, even a stack of wood I hadn't gotten around to splitting. She spoke with the slow confidence of someone who believed every blade of hay was a legal violation. I stayed back and said nothing. There was no need to argue with someone who was walking herself into a corner. 20 minutes later, the inspectors returned to the gate. One flipped his notepad shut and looked at me. "Mr. Jacob, everything appears to be up to code. Your property is correctly zoned for agricultural use, animals are properly enclosed, and there are no signs of health or safety violations." Karen's jaw twitched. She stepped forward quickly. "And the goose? That goose attacked a guest." The younger inspector looked mildly amused. "Farm animals on farmland are not a legal issue unless there's an official bite report or recurring danger. Sounds like a civil matter. But the noise, the smell, the whole spectacle," she stammered. The other inspector remained calm. "Ma'am, respectfully, none of those things constitute a violation. If there's nothing further, we'll be on our way." They got back in the vehicle and left, tires crunching softly on the gravel. Karen stood there, stunned and red-faced. Her plan had flopped harder than a groomsman into a pool of jello. "You think you've won," she hissed at me, turning with slow fury. I leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. "Karen, I wasn't playing." Her voice cracked slightly. "You humiliated me. You turned the whole neighborhood against me. That wedding was supposed to elevate this community's prestige. Do you have any idea how much money I've lost because of you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lost? Or pocketed and now can't justify?" That hit the nerve I expected. She looked away, lips pursed so tightly it looked like she was holding in fire. "You're going to regret this," she muttered. "I'll make sure of it." "You already tried," I replied, my voice flat. "And now you're standing in the dust while your reputation blows away with it." She stood there a moment longer, flustered and unsure. Then, in silence, she turned and walked back to her car, slamming the door hard enough to startle a squirrel out of the hedge. I thought that was the end, but that afternoon, I received a message from one of the HOA board members, Walt, a quiet guy with a bald head and a low tolerance for drama. "Emergency meeting tonight. Karen's unraveling. Might be worth showing up." I almost didn't go. I wasn't a member, and I had no interest in HOA business. But curiosity, like Karen's ego, is a powerful thing. I wanted to see just how far her house of cards had collapsed. That evening, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled, and people lined the back wall. The air buzzed, not with chatter, but with tension. Karen sat stiffly at the board table, hands clamped to her notes. Her smile was a shadow of its former self. If confidence were a candle, hers was down to the wick. Walt stood up and cleared his throat. "We are here tonight to discuss the future of this HOA following several complaints, a public disturbance, and An embarrassing incident that has gone viral beyond our neighborhood. Bowman. Karen tried to cut in. Before we go any further, I think it's important to address. Walt held up a hand. Karen, please. We gave you the floor for years. Tonight, we're speaking. Another board member, an older woman with tortoise-shell glasses, spoke up next. You misused our trust. You told us the wedding was approved. You said the homeowner agreed. None of that was true. I was trying to help the community, Karen replied weakly. That event was meant to boost morale. It boosted a goat onto the DJ table, the woman snapped back. The room chuckled. Walt turned to the others. We've reviewed the documents. We've spoken to the affected parties. We've seen the footage. I believe a vote to remove Karen as acting president is warranted. Karen looked around, searching for allies. There were none. Even her former enablers stared at their shoes. The vote happened quickly. One by one, hands went up. When the last hand was raised, Walt turned back to her and said quietly, Karen, you're relieved of your duties effective immediately. A new president will be elected next week. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor, her folder thudded to the ground, papers spilling like the last gasp of authority. This isn't over, she growled, but everyone knew it was. As she stormed out, the room let out a long, quiet breath. A pressure that had weighed down the community for years had finally lifted. Walt turned to me. Jake, he said, thank you. I gave him a nod. Don't thank me, thank the cows. The room erupted in tired, grateful laughter. Outside, under the soft glow of the porch light, I stood for a moment and let the evening breeze wash over me. Max rested by my feet, tail wagging lazily. For once, the night felt clean. Karen had ruled by fear and fake rules for too long, but now the board had seen through the mask, and the neighborhood, finally, had woken up. I didn't win with yelling. I won with truth, timing, and a goose named Sergeant Honkers. For a brief, shining moment, I thought the madness had ended. Karen had been publicly humiliated, her clipboard dethroned, and her goose-bitten wedding plans reduced to social media memes and HOA whispers. I figured the HOA would lay low for a while, maybe regroup quietly behind hedges and formal emails. But I forgot who I was dealing with. It happened 2 mornings later, just as I was sipping coffee on the porch, listening to Max snore beside me and watching the sunrise glaze the barn roof gold. Peace. That's what I felt. But peace doesn't last long when a Karen is scheming. A white city vehicle rumbled down the gravel and came to a halt at my gate. 2 men in pressed shirts stepped out with clipboards and government tags clipped to their belts, and right behind them, her heels clicking like a warning siren, came Karen. Her hair was coiled into a tight bun that looked like it had been lacquered in place. Her arm clutched a thick folder stuffed with papers, and her face wore that familiar smugness I'd come to expect right before a fresh storm of entitlement. Mr. Jacob, one of the inspectors said, offering a polite nod. We've received multiple complaints about potential zoning violations and livestock issues on this property. We're here to conduct a routine inspection. I didn't need to ask who filed the complaints. Karen was already stepping forward, flipping open her folder as if she were leading a courtroom drama. We've had several concerns from HOA members, she said, her voice all fake concern and weaponized civility. Noise, animal safety, unauthorized use of agricultural space, just some routine follow-up to ensure everything is community appropriate. I took a long sip of my coffee, then met their gaze with a calm I didn't entirely feel. Funny how none of these complaints existed before someone tried to throw a wedding on land that didn't belong to them. Karen let out a performative sigh and said, "Let's not make this personal." "Oh, I'm not," I replied, "but I'll happily let the land speak for itself. Go ahead, inspect whatever you need." The inspectors thanked me and began walking the property, checking fencing, water systems, livestock enclosures, and storage structures. Karen trailed behind them, pointing at anything that looked even slightly dusty, as if she expected to uncover a secret chamber of HOA violations buried under my chicken coop. I followed from a distance, keeping quiet. I didn't need to say a thing. This was her last gasp. I could see it in the twitch of her jaw, the way her lips pinched every time the inspectors scribbled something she couldn't read. The deeper they went, the less confident she looked. Her clipboard wasn't a sword today, it was a shield made of paper. And finally returned to the driveway. They flipped through their notes, spoke quietly to each other, then one cleared his throat and addressed me directly. "Mr. Jacob, your property is in full compliance with all municipal regulations. Your livestock is properly housed. Your fences meet code. The zoning is accurate. We found no violations." Karen's smile faltered. She stepped forward, tone sharpening like a cornered animal. "What about the goose? He attacked a wedding guest. That has to count for something." The second inspector looked mildly amused. "We don't regulate individual animal behavior unless there's a pattern or public danger. And frankly, the incident occurred on private property with no authorization. You'd have to take that up civilly." "Civilly?" Karen sputtered. "You can't be serious. This is outrageous." The first inspector tucked his pen into his clipboard. "Ma'am, we're finished here. Thank you for your time." With that, they climbed into their truck and drove off, kicking up a light trail of dust that hovered behind them like punctuation on the end of a sentence. Karen was left standing at the edge of my driveway, holding her file like it had betrayed her. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, rounding on me. "No," I said, leaning against the fence post. "Funny was the goat dancing on the sound system. This is just satisfying. You humiliated me. You destroyed my reputation, my wedding plans, my leadership role. Do you have any idea what I've lost because of you?" I didn't flinch. "You mean the leadership role you earned by lying? The wedding you planned on stolen land? The money you took from people without permission? Yeah, Karen, I know exactly what you lost. The difference is, I didn't take it. You threw it away." She took a step forward, eyes gleaming with desperation. "You're going to regret this. I don't know how, but I'll find a way to make you pay." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "The only reason you're not in jail right now is because I didn't press charges. So if I were you, I'd take that folder and walk away before the word trespassing becomes part of a court record." For the first time she hesitated. Her breath caught in her throat and a flicker of uncertainty passed behind her eyes. She looked down at the folder, then at me, then back toward her car. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stalked off. She didn't slam the car door. She didn't rev the engine. She just drove away in silence. And somehow, that was louder than any threat she could have made. Later that afternoon, I got a message from one of the remaining board members. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's unraveling. Thought you'd want to know." And so I went. Not because I was a member. I wasn't. But because I'd earned my seat at the table with a goose, a bowl, and a shovel full of karma. The meeting wasn't like the others. No cookie trays, no wine and cheese, just quiet tension, broken by murmurs and glances that all pointed to one seat, Karen's. She sat rigidly, lips pursed, fingers wrapped tight around the edge of her chair, like she could anchor herself in place. The board chair Walt stood up. He cleared his throat and said, "We're here tonight because this HOA has become a punchline. Because lies were told, funds were misused, and one person acted like she owned what she didn't." Karen tried to interrupt, but he raised a hand. "Karen, not tonight. We gave you the benefit of the doubt for years. You fined people for mailbox colors, Halloween decor, and grass height. But what happened with that wedding? And everything since? Crossed the line." Another board member added, "You put us all at legal risk. You forged approvals, manipulated members, and now we're the ones cleaning up the mess." Karen's voice cracked. "I was doing what's best for the community." "No," Walt replied. "You were doing what was best for you." And then came the motion, a formal vote to remove her as acting HOA president. One by one, hands went up. Quietly, deliberately. Even her former allies didn't raise a defense. When it was over, Karen just sat there. No rage, no outburst, just a hollow silence. "You have 1 week to resign," Walt said softly. After that, we'll appoint a new board." She stood up slowly, gathered her folder, and left without a word. The door didn't slam, the room didn't cheer, just the quiet exhale of people finally free. As I walked back home under a sky full of stars, Max trotted beside me, tail swishing like a metronome. For the first time in a long while, the air felt still, not because something was about to explode, but because something had finally ended. The queen of chaos was gone, the land was quiet, and karma, it seemed, had 4 hooves and a mean honk. In the weeks that followed Karen's public downfall, the neighborhood shifted. The air felt lighter, like a pressure valve had finally been released. People started talking again, really talking. Lawn chairs appeared in front yards, neighbors waved longer, lingered in conversation, and laughed more easily. It was as if Karen's presence had cast a shadow over the entire block, and now that it was gone, the sunlight had returned. Her front porch remained eerily still. The once constant flow of HOA notices taped to doors had stopped. Her famous HOA business-only sign disappeared, replaced by nothing but silence, curtains drawn, lights off, and not a single clipboard in sight. Then, one afternoon I saw it, a for sale sign staked deep into Karen's front yard. No fanfare, no farewell letter to the community, just a quiet retreat. I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching a real estate agent straighten the sign. It was surreal. This was the woman who once acted like she held the deed to every house in a 10-block radius, and now she was leaving without even a puff of smoke. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Some storms don't end with thunder, they just move on, leaving fresh air behind. But the story didn't quite end there. A week after the for sale sign appeared, I got a knock at my back gate. It wasn't the mailman or another reporter fishing for HOA gossip. It was the bride, the same one who had sobbed into her bouquet and cursed the day she ever trusted Karen. Only this time she looked different, lighter, not just in posture, but in spirit. She held a small box in one hand and a hopeful smile on her face. "Mind if I come in?" she asked gently. I nodded and opened the gate. She stepped through and immediately looked out at the land where her wedding had fallen apart. The chairs were long gone. The decorations, trampled by cows, had been cleared away. But the scene was still vivid for both of us. She let out a quiet laugh. "It looks so peaceful." I gestured to a pair of patio chairs. "It usually is when Karen's not planning unauthorized receptions," she chuckled and sat down. "I just wanted to say thank you, properly this time." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not completely losing it on us," she said. "For letting the truth come out even when the cost was chaos. You saved us from her." I shrugged. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because someone needed to." She nodded and placed the small box on the table. "This is for the trouble." I opened it. Inside was a check, and not a small one. "I know it doesn't fix the mess," she added quickly, "but it's from my parents. My dad was furious when he realized Karen had scammed everyone. He's suing her, by the way." I closed the box and nodded. "Glad someone's holding her accountable." She smiled. "We're doing better now, Brandon and I. We started a YouTube channel, actually. Wedding fails and stories from the trenches. And yours?" "Well, it's our top video." I laughed softly, happy to provide content. As she stood to leave, she paused. "You know, as wild as it was, that wedding, the animals, the jello, the chaos, it's the one thing people keep talking about. They don't remember the flowers or the cake. They remember Sergeant Honkers defending the property line like a little feathered warrior." I grinned. "He's still proud of that moment." She turned to leave, then looked back one more time. "Thanks for standing your ground." And with that, she walked out of my gate, leaving behind the first real moment of closure since the chaos had begun. A few days later, I received another unexpected visit, this time from Walt, the newly elected HOA president. He arrived without a clipboard, without a smug attitude, and without any plans to commandeer my backyard. Just a man in jeans and a flannel, holding a folded letter. "Jake," he said, offering a handshake, "wanted to give you this personally." I unfolded the paper. It was an official letter from the HOA board. A little apology. A new apology apology. A quick close, a clause that made me chuckle that excluded 14 community events must receive written consent from any homeowner involved. And no, a clipboard does not count. Below that was another line, likely written with a smirk. Section 15. All decorative or edible modifications to private property, Jell-O or otherwise, are considered homeowner discretion. I folded the letter and nodded. Thanks. Walt hesitated before speaking again. By the way, the neighborhood was wondering, any plans to do the Jell-O thing again? I tilted my head. Thinking about it, let us know, he said with a grin. We'll bring whipped cream. That spring, I did it again. Same pool. New flavor. Lime green this time. I didn't make it a spectacle, but word got around. Kids came by after school just to see it wobble. Adults dropped off disposable cameras and sticky notes with puns like jiggling for justice and respect the wobble. What started as a boundary, a red line drawn in gelatin, became something bigger. It became tradition. And so every year, on the same weekend Karen tried to take over my yard, I filled that pool with a new batch. Just a little reminder of what happens when entitlement meets resistance. I don't do it for revenge anymore. I do it because neighborhoods are made of stories. And this became ours. A story about a woman with too much power, a community too quiet for too long, and one very persistent goose who refused to let her walk all over us. As the sun sets over my land, Max dozes on the porch beside me. The air smells faintly of Jell-O and fresh grass. And I sit in my chair with a drink in hand, listening to the sound of laughter drifting through the fence from neighbors old and new. Karen may have thought she could run this neighborhood, but she didn't know it was built on stubborn soil, guarded by cows, goats, and a goose who honks like he means it. And if she ever tries to come back, well, the gate's still there. So is the Jell-O, and we're more than ready. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.